Oh, that was a very big greeting. I wouldn't say I was one of the biggest journalists on Twitter. I do try. In fact, what's interesting about Twitter is people like Catelyn make it look very effortless. And actually, it's really quite hard to sum it up very pithily, get the tone right, not really trip yourself up and make a total tweet of yourself, which is a real danger. Often the dangers can be bigger than the rewards. So I think it's easy to, from the layman's perspective, to think it's easy, but it isn't necessarily so. I think what's really interesting about journalists and Twitter is quite how Twitter has changed the whole way that journalists work. I mean, just this morning, all the front pages were full of the Ellen DeGeneres tweet from the Oscars. And in a way, that became almost the kind of bigger story than who had won the prizes. And I think that we're really seeing that in lots of our coverage. It's not just the Oscars, the Twitter feeds about the Ukraine. There was the Obama kind of election kind of strategy, his tweet of 4 more years, and the rise of the selfie. The Mandela funeral was absolutely defined in some ways by the selfie of the Danish Prime Minister and Cameron. So I think that Twitter really changes. It's become the lens through which we see often kind of breaking news and breaking events, and often it becomes the subject of conversation in conference. I was sitting in conference this morning as everything was shifting in the Ukraine and what's going to happen in the Crimea, and someone was actually kind of having a Twitter feed on their phone and kind of giving updates as the conversation was going on. So it really has become the way of kind of seeing live information kind of in real time, more so even than the rolling TV news, which everyone's looking at. It's like, oh, are there any rumours of this on Twitter? The Bin Laden raid, of course, the first kind of glimmerings of that were on Twitter. So it really is where journalists themselves often get the first inkling of what's going on. I mean, of course, it's often wrong, and that's where the journalism becomes important. It's all very well to say you can have citizen journalists who are going to bung it all on Twitter, and therefore why do we need professional journalists? But just how wrong or how those rumours can not be right or are kind of half-sourced, that's I think where there's a very interesting interaction between what you see on Twitter and then what journalists do in the newsroom, which is to then try and investigate that stuff, put some real sourcing behind it, use it maybe as a lead, and then from that you try and flesh out a real story. So that's a place where Twitter kind of becomes, it's where you get the kind of glimmers of news, and then newspapers flesh it out, and then it kind of gets kind of reverberates again through Twitter. So there's a very interesting kind of symbiosis there. I was asked a bit to talk about how I use Twitter myself, and I think it's brilliant for kind of lazy hacks, basically, because it used to be you get up in the morning, you had to go through all the newspapers and see what the kind of stories were and make your own view. These days you can just get straight into your Twitter timeline, see what everyone's talking about, and then go straight into those sites and look at those, all those sites or those papers and look at what's there. So it's a great, I'm sure Nick knows, it's a very good, useful shortcut for what's kind of creating the gossip. So that's interesting. And then also there's the satisfaction of truffling out something that you think's interesting, like Catelyn with her parmesan, or a particular view on, say, I was quite interested in the page 3 and breast cancer debate this morning and how that was going down. So you almost get an instant focus group on something which is out there, which of course you never got before. As a columnist, I'm aware both of the advantages of Twitter and the pitfalls. So it used to be that you'd have to wait for the green ink letters to come in on Monday going, you are a completely stupid idiot, how can you possibly think this? Now you get it in real time. No sooner has someone picked up the paper than you're getting a tweet saying, how can you possibly say that? Or I had some professor tweeting me about I wrote a column about prenuptial agreements and the law this weekend, and I got a professor saying, have you read the entire Law Commission document on what you were talking about? And so I was like, yes, definitely read the executive summary, skimmed through it, and then he sent me some very, very specific kind of questions on the report, so I had to kind of go, well, actually, busted, read the executive summary and the pertinent bits, don't think I can give you a view on the full impact of page 196, quite yet. So there is that interaction with your readers, I think, is really helpful. You often get tipped off to stories that you wouldn't know about. And I'm always really touched by the kind of things that readers will share with you about what's happened to them or their own experiences or something sad. So I think it makes it a much more kind of visceral connection between, often it used to feel like you filed your copy, it went out into the void, and you got a few kind of weird letters and you went on to the next week. Now you really enter into a dialogue, and often I have changed my mind as a result of things that people have tweeted to me. And it's become a real kind of part of, you really know if you've hit a nerve as a columnist, because your Twitter feed goes crazy on a Sunday morning, and if it's a bit meh, then no one really cares and it kind of vanishes into the ether. So that's become quite an interesting calibration. And as I wear two hats, I'm also an editor, and it means from the number of kind of Twitter hits or the amount of traffic that individual stories get, we can now see really what our readers are interested in at a very granular level. And we also know how much Twitter drives traffic to the stories in the Sunday Times. It's something that I think some news brands, and including ours, were a bit slow to kind of wake up to, was the strength of that symbiotic relationship, and how journalists tweeting stuff then drives massive traffic back to the site, and then more comments, and then that feeds back into the paper's conversation about what they're going to do the next week. So there's a kind of interesting dialogue, I think, going on with Twitter. Not always, and some of it's quite kind of smoke and mirrors, some of it's a bit dangerous, and sometimes it gives us ideas. So Jeremy Clarkson tweeted last week about Piers Morgan when he got fired from CNN in quite kind of robust terms, and we were all sitting around a conference, and I thought, well, we've got to get Jeremy to write his column this weekend on that, because that had been retweeted hundreds of times, and you know that you're onto something. So hopefully it also gives newspapers a way to feel more relevant and more interesting to their readers. I hope this is going to work. Yeah, okay, good. This is, I think there's also some commercial interesting kind of features around this. This is a tweet. This is a new thing that we're doing on the Sunday Times with the Times, which is called Front Row, which is it's a web app which congregates together all the fashion tweets. So if you're a fashionista and you can't go to fashion shows, so all my fashion friends are sitting in Paris looking at the shows today, you can have a live feed of all the very best tweets from the fashion editors, from the fashion kind of insiders, the fashion bloggers, and the people who are sitting in the front rows at the shows, showing it to you in real time. And of course, you could, if you had the time, you could be sitting on the web and kind of dipping into all these people's different feeds. But we think that this is newspapers often, in a world where there's so much going on, act as filters. They act as curators. Our readers trust us to point them. We know they haven't got very much time. We curate it so that you don't have to. So what this does is the editor of Style, all her team, Laura Craik on the Times, they're all putting together all the best tweets that they can see out there and all the stuff live from the shows into this live feed. And this is American Express have sponsored, gave us some money towards doing the first one. We've got 15,500 uniques. We've just been doing this for 3 weeks. And they were sending it particularly to their premium customers as a kind of extra service. And we've got a whole load of people interested in sponsoring the ones that we're going to do in the autumn. So there's a lot of the talk at the moment is about native advertising, sponsored content, all that kind of thing. This is the kind of brave new world, particularly for newspapers. And I think that these kind of platforms may offer ways that we can do that without it interfering too much with kind of editorial integrity, but also showcasing brands in a rather kind of sexy environment that they might want to be part of. So as editorial director of the Sunday Times, part of my brief is to be a kind of friendly hand to our commercial teams in marketing and in the advertising part of the business. And this is something that we're quite excited about as a possible forward-looking model. We also do it at the party conferences, where we curate kind of all our columnists kind of tweeting about what's going on there, and that's been very successful. But I think that this may be using Twitter and curating Twitter and then maybe sponsoring those feeds is a possible new way of looking at things in the future. So I will. We've all heard a lot this afternoon. I will hand you back to our nice compere. But I hope that's an interesting insight into how we actually use Twitter on the front line.